We are joined now by Billy Embody of the Bengal Tiger that is on On3's LSU site. And Billy, we covered this on your show a couple weeks ago, but I want to anybody who needs to hear this, I want them to hear it. Because here at On3, we've had a little internal debate about what to call Garrett Nussmeier. JD Pickell, the esteemed JD Pickell, wants to call him the Gumbo Gunslinger. I'm not sure I can get behind that. First of all, Garrett grew up all over the place. Dad, Doug, was coaching at various stops around the country. So I realize the family is originally from Louisiana, but I'm not sure we're going to attach Gumbo to the man's name. And you on the message boards have, I believe, put this to rest among the LSU community.
Well, I think I got to give a lot of credit to our Bengal Tiger subscribers. They jumped kind of on JD a little bit there, fairly or unfairly. You know, JD's trying to help out Garrett build his brand. You know, NIL these days always need a little bit of extra there. But the Nusb Bus has rolled around the country for quite some time now throughout his childhood into his high school career. But it has stayed parked in the garage at LSU for the most part for the last few seasons. And now it's ready to get going on his SEC tour and becoming the starting quarterback at LSU. So the Nusb Bus makes a lot of sense. There are a lot of people who have hopped on the Nusb Bus train, and it's been rolling for quite some time. And, you know, I love Garrett. He doesn't seem like he's really packing in all the different ways you can have gumbo either. So he is very much carrying the torch for LSU by way of the bus.
And good. I like this. Plus, Eric Musselman has moved on to USC from Arkansas, so there is no Nusb Bus in the SEC, and you kind of need a new bus. So there's no Gus Bus in the SEC anymore since Gus Malzahn got fired at Auburn. That is in the Big 12 now. So yeah, I mean, it has to be the Nusb Bus. Good. I'm glad we settled that. I'm glad we got that taken care of. I feel like that's been hanging over our heads for a while. What else has been hanging over LSU's head? Oh, yeah. They had maybe one of the worst defenses in the history of college football last year. So how do they fix that? That's one thing we've talked about, but now post-spring practice, you've gotten a chance to see what the roster is going to look like. How do they get better defensively?
Now it's about finding the best available defensive tackles and just getting them on board. And look, there is a sort of a scholarship crunch in a way for LSU as they try to address this position that really needs two defensive tackles to come in and just give them good quality reps. And so there are still options out there. They need to work quickly before summer begins and these guys start to, you know, make those decisions. We've seen Dominic Williams, we've seen Simeon Barrow end up elsewhere. They've been linked to different guys throughout the spring portal window, but the reality is now it's about finding guys who can give you some snaps at 100%, and you have a complimentary guy next to him or coming off the bench who can give you snaps at 100%. And by way of quantity now, maybe that would make LSU's interior of their defensive line better. There's also a thought of moving Savion Jones, who's a defensive end inside, kind of bulking him up, maybe trying to figure that out. There's a lot of different ways they're going to have to address this, including walk-ons like Preston Hickey. They moved offensive lineman Kimo Makiniole over to the defensive line. They're just trying just about everything to make this work. But LSU, at this point, you've missed on the big fish, Dominic Williams, Simeon Barrow. You got to go out and just address the position however you can with numbers. And maybe it's an Aiden Huntington from ULM who's gotten some good burn in the portal since entering. He was all Sun Belt. Maybe it's another player, but they have to just go out and, quite honestly, at this point, take whoever's got some starting experience and some production, no matter the level, and just bring them in and get them on board. The defensive line is first. The cornerback room would be the other.
Okay, well, before we get to the cornerback room, let's talk about the D tackle search in the portal, because obviously everybody needs him. You know, we talked about Dominic Williams last week. It came down to really Texas and Oklahoma, and eventually it sounds like basically Texas said, too rich for our blood. Oklahoma said, no, we really need defensive tackles. Let's go. How hard is it to balance that? Because that's one thing that Pete Nakos and I talked about the other day is when you want to bring a guy in, you have to be careful because you have to watch what you have everybody else down for NIL wise. Because if you bring in somebody and that number's out of whack a little bit, you set the number out of whack for everybody else too, and then you have a problem.
And this is for lack of a better term, salary cap debate you have to have when you manage a roster. And LSU just probably couldn't get up to the number that, Oklahoma ended up giving Dominic Williams, which I don't think it hit 7 figures. Could be wrong. Don't know the exact number, but I know that was rumored at one point for Dominic Williams, all 3 teams in need of defensive tackles and all 3 in the SEC. But when you look at what schools have to balance is when you need to address positions, do you go out and get, if you can, that tip-top blue chip type of transfer that is going to command a heavy 6-figure NIL deal? Or do you go out and you say, okay, we've seen a guy like this or a guy like that start in spurts at a school or contribute for multiple years as a veteran? I look at some schools around the country that are bringing in quantity and a good enough level of quality to address positions and build depth, because especially along the defensive line, you can't just say we're going to bring in one player and it's going to fix our issue, because these big guys, the way offenses are now these days, they move and they can tire those guys out. If you don't have somebody competent behind them to give you some reps, I mean, there are going to be opportunities for offenses to take advantage of that. So the balance to walk is, yes, you can make a splash. You can make your fan base happy by bringing in a Dominic Williams, a Simeon Barrow, some of these other guys from the winter portal window, but it would have helped LSU's defensive tackle issue. It might not have overall fixed it because they just don't have the depth overall. They brought in Sean Washington from Georgia. He still needs to develop. They've got some freshmen. They've got some other pieces, but they really need quantity until Bo Davis can address that position like he did in high school recruiting for Texas. And that takes time. And Brian Kelly.
Well, the other good thing about Bo Davis, though, is Bo Davis inherited Byron Murphy, inherited Tavondre Sweat, turned them into very good college defensive linemen, first and second round NFL draft pick. That probably helps too. I mean, he should be able to work with what's on the roster a little bit. But, you mentioned corner is another one. And this one baffles me a little bit, Billy. As somebody from the outside who spent basically decades watching LSU just plug in corner after corner after corner, always having somebody either ready or some true freshman who's ready to just pop in there and play. That was the most bizarre thing of the last 2 years, is watching them struggle at corner.
And this is where Brian Kelly took some time to adjust, along with his staff that he put in place for that LSU defensive staff. The floor, was so high for defensive backs when Corey Raymond was there, and continuing on that legacy of DBU, that when you missed, you really didn't miss badly on players. I mean, there were defensive backs that caught some grief at LSU for not being that level that they expect of a DBU caliber.
Even they go start at Alabama.
Yeah, and exactly. They go, they don't pan out, and then they go start at Alabama, or they, what have you. It's now the floor with Corey Raymond being back can at least be built up to a level. But LSU for a while didn't take many corners that were under 6 foot. I mean, that was kind of Corey Raymond's MO. Was 6 foot long, can run, just need to add some weight to him. That was kind of what they looked for, and they hit on him, whether it was blue chip guys or whether it was developmental players. And so that floor and kind of that expectation recruiting wise just kind of went away for a couple of years. And then you factor in missing on some portal takes like Denver Harris and a couple others, and then you're in a complete nightmare situation at corner. And even now, there's a lot of buzz around PJ Woodland coming out of the spring as a true freshman, or moving on Michael Turner, who's a signee, to defensive back and letting him go. There's a lot of kind of hope, but not many of these guys really look like what we're used to seeing at corner for LSU. So they're going to have to prove some of us wrong.
Yeah, and that's it. It's interesting having Corey Raymond back, because he definitely has a type that he goes and recruits. So like what we just talked about, I can imagine our conversation a year from now sounding very different. The problem is they got to play some games in between now and then. Now, so what it sounds like is the offense may have to pick up the slack again for the defense. We talked about Garrett Nussmeier. It's weird because it is such an unusual circumstance now to have this sort of quarterback ascension where you have a pretty good player, he waits his turn behind another really good player, and then he winds up being the starter. That's how basically everyone worked in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. But now it's like seeing a unicorn.
Yeah, and it's a pretty cool story for Garrett Nussmeier. I mean, he does claim Louisiana as, being where he's from. Out of all the places he's lived, he leans into being LSU's quarterback, and he's very excited about it. And he's got a group of receivers that you have Kyron Lacy coming back. He's talented. He was the third option last year. Can he be a true elite number one? We'll have to find that out. And he's got tools to be consistent and a good option for him. But that's why they went out and grabbed C.J. Daniels from Liberty, Xavier Thomas from Mississippi State. They've got a Chris Hilton, an Aaron Anderson, players like that coming back. And they have some freshmen who maybe could emerge, or redshirt freshmen, second-year guys that they could look to a little bit more as they try to find the right group, because, C.J. Daniels is going to have to make that step up in competition from Liberty. And it's not an easy one, but he's productive. He looked good in the spring. You look at Xavier Thomas in a bad Mississippi State offense, was able to be productive on top of what he can do in the return game. And so they have some depth, they have some pieces, and it's probably going to require a little bit of feeling out when the lights come on in the games. But that's also why they've got to lean heavily on a Mason Taylor at tight end and some of these other options to step up as well, because this offense is just going to look a little different. And I mean, the running game should be improved, in my opinion, too, because they've got two good backs there as well.
Well, we had Cortez Hankton, the receivers coach from LSU, on the show a few weeks ago, and he was talking about, just how Chris Hilton and Kyron Lacy got to watch Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas and how they worked. Because I think we were having this conversation last year. We knew Malik Neighbors was good. We knew Brian Thomas was good. But I don't know that we would have said both of those guys are surefire first rounders this time last year. So there is room for development. And I'm with you on CJ Daniels. That's a guy who was very productive at Liberty. You talk to the people at Liberty, they seem to think that he's going to be able to make that transition fairly easily. Yeah.
And I think I remember Brian Thomas coming out of high school, and I said to one of my friends or one of our subscribers, I said, he's either going to be a first round pick and going to wow everybody, or he's just going to be a complete bust and, kind of end up, just kind of withering away at LSU or moving on. And boy, he obviously boomed big time and ended up being a first round pick. Malik kind of had that competitiveness from the get go that you said, okay, if they can continue to find ways to get Jaden Daniels to push the ball down the field, he's going to make plays. And so we saw those flashes. There was a little bit more. And I don't want to say there's not hope going into this year by any means, but there was a little bit more hope that would happen and thought that it would with those two receivers, as well as Kyron Lacy being that third option. This year, you have two new guys coming in. You have Kyron Lacy coming back, who battled some drops early in his career. It's a different way of putting together this group of receivers. I mean, you look at Kyron Lacy being a transfer, Xavier Thomas, C.J. Daniels. It's not as much homegrown LSU talent. They're honestly, outside of Chris Hilton, you look at the top 5 on paper, they're all transfers. So it's a little bit of a different way of putting it together for LSU this year. Doesn't mean it can't be successful, but it just seems like as far as pure game breakers, they have some guys that have that potential, but they need to just show it a little bit more.
Well, and you mentioned the running game, and we've talked about LSU's offensive line. When Cody Blair and I did our ultimate teams, I had Will Campbell on mine. He drafted Emory Jones on his. Garrett Dellinger, their left guard, is a guy who started with them for the past 2 years. He'll be a third-year starter as well. It feels like this is a group that can – we know they can protect the passer, but it feels like they also should be able to open some holes in the run game. And, I realize this sounds like nostalgia almost, but remember when LSU always had 2 or 3 great backs and could just ram the ball down your throat? Is it possible that they move back a little bit toward that?
Yeah, I think Frank Wilson is doing a really good job recruiting that position. And we kind of saw kind of that COVID time, some of the freshmen off that 2019 team, like a John Emery, 4 or 5-star, didn't pan out. They took Armani Goodwin from Alabama at one point, and he had some promise, but battled injuries. They had different backs that all could do different things and showed flashes at times, but could never be consistent. Now it seems like Frank Wilson has that room, at least quality-wise, on a very good level. They don't have much depth this season, it seems, but I was talking about it on another podcast. I'm really high on what this run game could do. I mean, Caleb Jackson has a chance to really break out this year, and Josh Williams is a steady veteran. If Caden Durham could come in and give them some good snaps, they will have a chance to have one of the best backfields in the SEC, in my opinion, because they also have that offensive line who does return 4 starters, but also DJ Chester, the center. I mean, a lot of people think it's going to be addition by subtraction, and it's not as much of a slight to Charles Turner, the outgoing center, as much as it is that DJ Chester is that well thought of by many people around LSU's building. So I'm really excited about DJ Chester. I remember seeing him as a high school player. We played tackle. We showed the athleticism. When you plug him into the middle and you've got all those veterans around you, it might end up working out even better than LSU realized in that sense as they put together this group through the years that is now, I mean, they're going to have a lot of work to do for the 2025 offensive line, but enjoy this 2024 group because they're all really, really good.
Well, and that's the thing. It feels like this is now you have to capitalize. It's so rare to be able to have this type of veteran presence on your offensive line, this much accomplishment already. Like guys that have played, they're good. This is as experienced as they're going to be while they're playing for you. Like that's as good as it gets. But what is the realistic expectation for LSU? Like what among the LSU fan base, like the folks on your message board, what do they feel like is the ceiling for this team?
I mean, the expectation obviously is to be, competing
national championship.
National championship, getting there. I mean, the only higher expectations around LSU are for the baseball team. And so, I mean, right or wrong, that's just the reality of it. But LSU has a team that if they can be coached up better, and we talked about that with Bo Davis, coaching up that group at Texas on the defensive line. Blake Baker is obviously taking over as defensive coordinator, and they've got a really good staff on that side of the ball. If just schematically and putting it together better and more organized can help them improve into the, let's say, the 70s of college football defenses, that would be a win. And then it's about the offense holding up its end of the bargain that they have, the last year especially, but even when Jaden Daniels was still kind of learning as LSU's first-year starter, they were showing some flash and some promise and had some good games as well. But you could see this team honestly going anywhere from 8 wins to running the table. I mean, look at how close they were last year to doing it with a historically bad defense. And that is so hard to do. I mean, and LSU fans kind of got a taste of what, an A&M with Johnny Manziel or a Patrick Mahomes, Texas Tech. I mean, that's them having to score so many points to have a chance, and they still won 10 games. So Brian Kelly has a good floor for this program year in, year out because of how he prepares his team 6 days of the week leading up to Saturday. I mean, he has an analytical approach. He has a good feel for his team, and you see them be able to capture some big wins. You also have, seen them miss out on having really, really good teams because of some things that, whether you can pin it on Brian Kelly because he's in year 3 or whether you can, in certain instances, look back at the past and say they're in this position because of all the things prior to Brian Kelly arriving. It's been such a fluid rebuild. Each spot has, okay, they got to go out and address quarterback. All right, bring in Jaden Daniels. Check. All right, offensive line. Wow, Brad Davis has really made that better. But defense, it just didn't work out. After hitting on their transfers year 1 the way they did, it kind of blew the expectations even out of the water for years 2, year 3, years 4, where they didn't have the same luck in year 2 hitting on defensive transfers. And so we saw that defense suffer because of it. And now they're in the same position of trying to rebuild that defense. And there are certain spots that they've been able to continue to develop with guys that they already have, but they also have not gotten to the point where they're feeling comfortable yet with other positions because it still takes years to rebuild the way Brian Kelly would prefer to, which is really through the high school ranks.
Well, so LSU, if you go to FanDuel, the odds to make the college football playoff, to be in the 12-team field, yes is plus 116, no is minus 142. So we're essentially talking even money, kind of, almost even money, 50-50 proposition. And I think that's about right because like you said, and it's interesting to use the word rebuild because I think most programs, when they use the word rebuild, are not thinking along the lines of double-digit wins and division championships. And LSU has a division championship and 2 double-digit win seasons during this quote-unquote rebuild. So, yeah, I am fascinated to see how this winds up because it really bounced the ball one way here or the other. I go back to last year, the Ole Miss game could have been an LSU win very easily. The Missouri game could have been an LSU loss very easily. And so that's kind of how it's probably going to go in this year.
Yeah, and who knows? I mean, USC is a wild card. UCLA has a new coaching staff. You've got to take care of business in those type of games. But ultimately, I mean, let's say they go through growing pains and they're figuring out a new defense, or Garrett Nussmeier is not playing as well as he can. Then you look to the SEC slate, and it's really not that bad, in my opinion. At South Carolina,
it could be worse.
It could be a lot worse.
Yeah.
And LSU has to capitalize on the games they obviously should win, and then they've got to capitalize on their home games. I mean, Ole Miss, Alabama, Oklahoma stand out to me. But then you look at their road games at Arkansas. I mean, a lot of people saying Sam Pittman could be on the way out after this year. At A&M, brand new coaching staff, who knows? Billy Napier, probably a must-win game in the swamp for him. And then you've got Vandy and South Carolina in there. I mean, it's a manageable schedule for LSU. Yeah. And that's where you've got to capitalize, and you've got to find a way to get to Atlanta.
All you need to know about the back end of that Florida schedule is LSU coming to town might be the most winnable game.
Oh.
And that's not a slight to LSU. Billy, it is going to be so much fun to watch this rebuild. Yeah. Double-digit win rebuild.
Hopefully for the Bengal Tiger message board, it's going to be some fun.
Thank you, Billy.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples On 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.